Today I'm going to be kicking off a reading vlog where I read New York Times 5 best fiction books of 2024. I had such a fun time at the end of 2024 reading through the Goodreads Choice Awards. There was something so satisfying about getting through a complete list of recommendations for the first time. I've read a Goodreads Choice Awards category before, but I've never read all 20. I'd read 11 throughout the year. I finished the year by reading the remaining 9, and I just really wanted to find a project like that again to kick off 2025, and I thought it would also be a good chance to find some really great books. If these are some of the best books of the year, then theoretically I should probably enjoy at least some of them. And so I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this video, and I wanted to try something a little bit different, something that was a bit outside of my comfort zone. Not necessarily outside my comfort zone, but outside of what I prioritize. I do like reading just general fiction, literary fiction. When I pick up a book like that, that's a big book of the year, I usually enjoy it. I just don't make a lot of time to read those throughout the year because I'm so often reading mysteries and thrillers and horror books, and it's such a small fraction of my reading that I dedicate to reading these types of books that I usually do have a good time with. So I thought the New York Times list would be a fun one. They selected the top 10 books of the year. 5 were fiction, 5 were nonfiction. I am not a huge nonfiction reader. That just didn't feel like something that would be a success for me. So I decided to pick up the 5 best fiction books of the year, according to them. And I put it to the test to see if these books are actually great and worth my time. These are the 5 books that I will be reading throughout this video. You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique, I had never heard of. This is the only one on the list that was completely unfamiliar to me. And so it was fun to have one that was just totally not on my radar at all. James by Percival Everett is a book that is hard to not know anything about because it has been everywhere since it's been published. I've heard this one spoken about so much. It's on so many people's favorite lists. Being a historical fiction book, it is outside of my comfort zone, but because of its popularity, my interest was piqued. All Fours by Miranda July is a book I'd heard about just once or twice, and I remember when I first read the synopsis, I thought that could maybe be interesting, but it wasn't something that I ever probably would have prioritized. But it was an interesting one to have on this list because what I remembered knowing of this book is that it had something to do with women's sexuality, and so I thought that was an interesting standout on the list. Good Material by Dolly Alderton is a book I probably wouldn't have ever really picked up, but I have heard a lot about this author. A lot of people seem to really enjoy her writing. It's just not something that I ever really thought I would pick up. And then Martyr by Kaveh Akbar was one of my most anticipated books of the year throughout the year last year. As soon as I heard about it, read the description of it, it just really seemed like a book I would love, but I just kept pushing it off and off and off. It never felt like the right time to pick it up. And so this is the book that I was definitely the most excited to see on this list because I was really looking for a reason to read it. So those are all the books, and now I'm going to send you back in time to when I was first starting the list, and you can watch my experience with each of these books and see what I thought. I am 85 pages into Martyr. It's not quite what I expected so far. I thought this book was going to be perhaps more experimental, perhaps some poetry, different formats, because I know the author's a poet, and I thought I heard that this was experimental, but maybe I was wrong. So far, you are following this main character named Cyrus, who is originally born in, I can't remember, Iran? I think Iran. And when the story begins with him, he has lived a troubled life. Both of his parents are dead. He is a recovering alcoholic. He is a poet, and he's just sort of miserable, and he's just kind of stewing in that misery. And I don't really know exactly what the book will be because we are not necessarily changing perspectives, but focusing on different characters at different points in time and different points of the timeline, and going back in time a little bit and seeing stuff from his mom a little bit, stuff from his dad a little bit. It's kind of going through his family line, but then it'll come back to him a little bit as well. He is suffering with a lot of thoughts of existentialism and what's the point of life, what's the point of it all, and particularly he's obsessing on this idea of a martyr, and a lot of people in his life that are important to him have died, and he feels like they were meaningless deaths, and so he's really thinking about this concept of a martyr. How can you live a life that makes your death worthwhile to civilization in some way? And he's pursuing that path of understanding that. So far, the writing is really good. I think the first chapter could have just been a short story that I read on its own and it would have been outstanding. He's working this job where he is an actor for students who are going through their medical training. And so he'll act like someone who's receiving really bad news so that doctors in training get to go through simulations with these people of how to deliver terrible news. And that's where the first chapter focuses on, and then he starts having some of these ideas. And that's how you start to get familiar with him for the first time. I thought that was really good. So the writing's really good. I don't know where the story's gonna go and if it's gonna have a profound impact, but it's circling a lot of these ideas that I really enjoyed reading in 2024 about existentialism and the point of life and how to live a life with meaning and those sorts of things. So it has potential to be really good for me. It does feel a little bit meandering right now and a little bit directionless. So I'm hoping that I start to feel the thread of the story more as we go along. I'm halfway through Martyr now, right at page 200 in the book, and I just got past an interlude section that I wasn't expecting, which told its own little story. So I thought this was a good place for a midway update. I'm still really liking the writing of this. This is obviously a very talented writer, and each individual chapter, almost every chapter, there's some chapters that I haven't loved as much, but each individual chapter I'm really enjoying as its own piece of the story. But I'm just having trouble understanding it all together, I guess. It just feels very directionless and plotless to me. There's only one sort of movement in the story where we're moving forward, and that's with our main character who's obsessed with this idea of martyrdom. He finds out there's this artist who is dying and she's doing this exhibit where she sits and she'll talk to people, and he wants to go see her and talk to her. That's the only through line in the story, and then otherwise you're going back in time and you're getting these scenes from his life at different points in time, or scenes from his mom's life or his dad's life or his uncle's life. And so I'm having trouble feeling like I'm building momentum in this. It kind of is feeling like the same thing over and over and over again, where it's just these reflections or like moments to get you to reflect on the meaning of life in different ways. I don't know. I like all of the pieces. The whole is not working for me right now. I still have plenty of time to go in the book for that to change. I've just been kind of shocked because I've heard such wonderful things about this, and I even went and I was reading some reviews again, like some spoiler-free reviews, to see what people love about this so much, and I'm still not like getting it. So this one, I might not get it by the end. I don't know, but I'm gonna keep trying. I'm gonna finish this up and then I'll let you know my final thoughts. I finished Martyr and I did not love it. The ending didn't save it for me. I really thought this might be my favorite book of this video. I've been anticipating this book all year. I was wishing that I would have read it earlier because I thought maybe it'll be on my best books of 2024. Turns out that would not have been the case, so I guess it's fine that I saved it for now. I do not see what so many other people are seeing with this book. It's just not something that resonated with me as a whole story. There are so many good things here. The writing's excellent. I think I said this before, but the first chapter could have been an amazing short story on its own. So many quotable moments. I like all that it's exploring on this concept of being a martyr. What's the point of everything? What's the point of living? What's the point of dying? How do you live a purposeful life? How do you die a purposeful death? Does any of that matter anyways? I like all of these things, all these ingredients, but as a book, it just dragged on for me. It felt very repetitive. It's a very meandering story. You're reading in third person for your main character, but then you get these chapters that slip into first person of characters who are related to him in the story. And those moments like pull you out of the little bit of plot that you have that's driving the story forward, and then you get some chapters that are dreams, and then I don't know. I like the concept of it. Like one of the chapters is a dream of his mother and Lisa Simpson, and that sounds like something that I would love, but altogether it just didn't resonate with me as a full story for some reason. So unfortunately, sadly, this is a 2-star for me. I cannot believe it. I really didn't think it was going to go this way. There are so many people who love this book. I've seen this on people's top 10 of the year. Obviously, it is in this category. It was in the Goodreads Choice Awards. It's all over. People are celebrating it a lot. I would certainly read from the author again because I do think the writing's so great. I just missed it with this one somehow. Next, I feel like I need something that's a little bit of a lighter story because that one was full of dark concepts and just very like slow, and it brought the mood down. So I don't know if this is gonna be a good pick, but I'm gonna try Good Material next. It looks cheerful in the blurb. It says that it's delightful. Never read from Dolly Alderton before. Heard good things. It's a read with Jenna Pick. Seems like a crowd pleaser. I'm gonna jump into this one. I am 76 pages into good material, and so far I'm eating this up. This is so easy to read. I'm just flying through it. I didn't want to put it down yesterday. I was reading it before I went to bed last night, and I just wanted to keep flying through it, but it was getting kind of late. But I feel like I'm gonna read this really fast because I'm really liking it. You are following this 35-year-old guy who's going through a breakup, and he is feeling defeated. He feels like he loved this girl so much. He's so sad to lose her. He doesn't know what he's gonna do with himself, and they're still in contact, and they had this whole friend group, and it's just about the process of going through that heartbreak and how he's dealing with it. The story begins with a list that is called Reasons Why It's Good I'm Not with Jen. And it's just kind of like a breakup list that you make for yourself when you're going through your heartbreak and trying to remind yourself of why you're not a good match for that person, because the heartbreak just makes you feel like, well, maybe we should give it another shot, and he's just trying to get over her. It's a very British book. It has a lot of humor to it. The story actually begins with this poem that's in the beginning, and I really liked that little poem too. I usually don't care for little poems or quotes in the beginning of books. I'll hold it here so you can pause if you want to read it for yourself. But it's just kind of about like elephants and finding these bones and how elephants act when they find bones of their own kind and they don't know what to do with them. They have this little ritual where they're like picking them up with their trunks and kind of moving them and scattering them around. And it's kind of a reflection of like when humans are going through a sad time and we don't really know what to do with our emotions and we just go through all these rituals. So it's just a book about heartbreak, and it's just really working for me. I love the tone. I love the voice in it. There's a lot of dialogue. These characters are just like flying off the page at me. There's not a lot of plot beyond like him just going through the heartbreak, and you don't know the full story even really of why they broke up, and I guess he doesn't really either. It's just like one day she broke up with him, and I imagine you're gonna get some insight into that. But it's going good so far. I'm having a good time with it. I feel like I'm gonna absolutely fly through it because it just breezes by. Quick midway update on good material. I'm at page 185, and I don't have too much more to say other than I still am really enjoying it, and it's kind of just the same thing it was from the very beginning. This is another book that feels a bit plotless. It does not have a lot of plot to it. You're just following this guy working through his heartbreak, but I'm just resonating with this one a lot more. I'm finding a lot of moments really funny. I'm finding a lot of moments really relatable. I guess in general, I was also surprised to see we're following a man throughout this whole novel. Just like, I thought this screamed kind of like a book that would be about a woman, just looking at it and hearing it's about a breakup. And I know Dolly Alderton writes about love. Dolly Alderton's also a woman, so I don't know. I just kind of expected this to follow the woman through the breakup, but it's interesting to be following the man. And I'm just having a good time with it. I'm finding it a real shame that in the framing of this clip, you cannot appreciate my very fun shirt. Girls just want to have fundamental rights, am I right? Also kind of nicely matches with this book. Lots of colors. Good pick. Anyways, I finished good material last night and I absolutely loved it, and I'm giving it a 5-star. It is funny because my issue with Martyr was it felt so plotless. This also felt pretty plotless, although more strung together and on a direction than I felt like Martyr was. But there were so many things that I loved about this so much. It just felt so real and authentic and human, watching this person just go through the trials of heartbreak. It's also really interesting how this is framed from the perspective of a man, which is so uncommon in reading a story like this, and you're really on his side, which is also kind of uncommon in a story of a breakup of a heterosexual couple. You know, usually you're rooting for the woman. You're like, oh my God, that man was awful. You watch her kind of pick up the pieces from this terrible man and reinvent her life and go on this journey of self-discovery. But this was quite different because you're following this man and you're only getting his side of the story, right? So you're like, I don't know, he seems like a nice guy, and like, it's really sad, and why'd she break up with him, and all he wants is to just like have a little family, and he just seems like such husband material based on the story he's telling you. And you know, you're not necessarily being asked to question that a ton by the framing of the story, but I was questioning it as a reader. I'm like, is something gonna flip on its head? Are we gonna learn something new? And that's not really the story that it's trying to tell necessarily. It's just doing something different, which I thought gave it a fresh perspective. And I just really enjoyed the comedy of this. I really enjoyed the characters of this. Morris is one of my favorite characters I've read in a while. I love him. There's also so many moments where you get these like little things that tie together a smaller mention or a smaller detail from something earlier in the story that gives you this like satisfaction and like reward for paying attention to the little details of the story, where these little things just connect, and then it has like a humorous or heartwarming edge to it, saying like, oh, that was actually because of this, or you know, oh, that's such a good writing that she chose to end this thought with this particular song because that's a callback to this thing about their relationship in a different way. It's just so intricately put together and it was just really beautiful. There were a lot of moments where I laughed in this book. There were several moments in the end where I teared up and shed some tears too. I just feel like it was so raw and really just takes you on this journey of this concept of relationships. It's like such a true story of relationships, and like you want these people to be together so bad, but also you understand why it makes sense that they aren't. By the end of the book, I wanted a whole nother book that was the woman's perspective. I would have just kept reading another 300 pages to get her side of the story. And then after I finished the book, I was going through reviews and reading what other people had to say, and I was a little bit like, is it a 5-star? Because like I don't know, like there wasn't really a full plot. It was kind of just an experience. Like, is it a 4? Is it a 5? But as I was reading reviews, I was finding myself getting so frustrated with reading reviews that were like a 3-star, that was complaining about certain elements or saying they didn't like the structure of a certain thing. And I'm like, you just didn't get it. And when I find myself feeling that passion about a book and being like, no, you just didn't get it, I'm like, yeah, it's a 5-star. I am kind of surprised this would be on best fiction of the year, I guess, but I'm only 2 books in, so I'll have a better stance on what I think the top 5 fiction books of the year are reflecting once I get through all of them. But right now I'm kind of like, this isn't the type of book that you would think gets this kind of recognition. But I don't know. We'll see my full thoughts once I get through the full list. This was a really good pick-me-up after Martyr being a more serious book. I think I'm ready to go back to another more serious book on the list. At least I think it'll be a more serious book. And so I think what I'm going to pick up next is James. First update for James, I'm 92 pages in, and I feel like this book is going to go by quicker than I thought it would as well. I thought this book was going to be very like historical fiction-y and dense, and something that I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards, but it's actually going fine so far. There's a ton of dialogue, the characters are really coming to life off the page. I'm gripped in the story and I'm having a pretty good time. This is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which I think I probably read at some point when I was a child, but I have no memory of. And I did not really refresh myself on anything about that story before going into this, because I did hear that this can just stand alone on its own too. I do feel like you probably appreciate it a lot more if you have the context of that original story and how that was like this Hallmark novel in America. But what Percival Everett is doing with the story and the twist that he's putting on it, I feel like makes more of an impact knowing all of those things. In this story, you're following 2 main characters, Jim, who is a slave, and Huck, who is this little white boy who he has around at the house that he's working at. I don't think he's related to this woman. I think the woman is just like taking care of this boy. And Huck has an abusive father who's a drunk and very abusive, and Jim, obviously horrible conditions because he's a slave, but he has his own family too. And they end up getting brought together in this moment because Jim hears that he's about to be sold to New Orleans, but he will be separated from his family if that happens. So he's like, I've got to run away. And at the same time, Huck is like, I've got to run away from my dad. And they end up meeting up and going down the Mississippi River together to escape. So far, everything's going good. I just do kind of feel like, where's the story going to go from here at this point? I was really enjoying it for probably like the first 65 pages. And then the last little bit, I'm like, okay, are we just going to keep going down the river doing the same things? I'm not sure. So it's definitely not my style of book that I would typically pick up anyways, but I'm going outside my comfort zone to read it because it made this list. It was very beloved in 2024. So maybe it'll surprise me. It's already surprised me in some capacity that I'm engaged with the story more than I thought I would be. So I'll keep going and I'll let you know how it goes. I'm midway through James and really still liking it. I was a little unsure about where the plot was going to go, how long I was going to stay engaged in this, but I would say I'm still just as engaged now in the middle as I have been throughout the story. I'm getting really connected to these characters and they just keep finding themselves in all these situations where I'm just rooting for them so hard, like, oh no, we've got to get away from these terrible people, or like, oh no, you're separated, we've got to get back together. So I've really just been in this story with these characters, even though it really is just the type of general fiction book that I would never pick up. I'm appreciating it for what it is, still having a good time, and it's been a quick read, so I'm gonna finish it up and then I'll let you know my final thoughts. So I finished James and I'm giving it a 5-star. I feel like this isn't a book that I'm going to be like overly passionate about 5-star, like screaming you have to read this sort of thing, probably because it's not in my usual lane, but it was just like perfect. It was a perfect book, so I had to give it a 5-star. There was nothing else that made sense. This was a very gripping sort of adventure story as you're following this runaway slave and this young boy Huckleberry Finn who are running away down the Mississippi River together. It's set against the antebellum South with all of its gruesome, horrific circumstances, and that makes it a difficult read and a challenging read, but the pacing of it, it's so fast paced. These characters are so engaging. There's moments of levity in how the main character is just finding a way to get through his own really challenging life. There's a lot about language and the power of language and how language is associated with knowledge and power dynamics. And there's just a lot. There's a lot here. This feels like a book that would be an instant classic. It feels like if you're reading Mark Twain, you should read this with it. Not that I'm the best point of reference for that because I haven't read Mark Twain since like, I don't know, 15 years ago. But it just feels like it has a lot to say. It's very well crafted. It is a perfect book. It was just a perfect book. I totally see why this has been getting all the awards this year. It feels like it absolutely belongs on this list. This just feels like a book that's going to be really important for a long time. It was really good. It's definitely not something I would have picked up on my own. I just, at this point in my life, don't really like to read about suffering that much anymore. I still read mysteries and thrillers and darker things, but specifically just like suffering. You know, when you know a book is following a slave, when you know a book is set in the antebellum South, when you know a book is going to be filled with like really horrible things happening to humans, that's something that is really difficult for me to want to pick up. At least now. I used to read stuff like that more often, but I'm just in like a place where the world is bad enough that that's not like what I always want to be reading right now. But I still totally appreciated this book. I thought it was great. And it has me really interested in Percival Everett. I definitely feel like I would read more from him because he just has a very engaging writing style that has almost a cinematic quality to it. I really felt like I was like watching all of this play out in front of me. So 5 stars, very good. And next up, I am going into All Fours. Saying I'm going into All Fours was maybe not the best phrasing because I have an idea of why I think this is called All Fours given my initial entry into it. I'm currently 60 pages into it, and this is a story about this woman who is, I think, 45. She's a wife, she's a mother. She decides to take this long road trip from LA to New York. It's very unlike her, but she's trying to challenge herself to break out of her box by doing this. And she gets about 20 minutes down the road and then ends up in a motel and just stays there for a couple weeks. That's the synopsis of the story. And during that time, I think she's gonna have some kind of awakenings. It's very sexual in nature so far. There's a lot of talk about her sexuality, her relationship with her husband, and it feels like there's all this pent-up energy that she's gonna be exploring throughout the book, hence why I'm assuming this is called All Fours. So far, 60 pages into it, I am liking it. It's kind of reminding me of Melissa Broder a little bit. I've read a little bit from Melissa Broder, not a ton, but sort of in that vein. This woman's kind of miserable to follow, in my opinion. I understand the feelings of being trapped by all of these things in your life, right? Like this is a very common story of motherhood, of being a woman, of being an older woman who hasn't discovered herself or like unleashed herself from society's shackles to just like truly be. I like those kinds of stories. I find those stories very relatable. This woman in particular, I'm finding to be very, almost like a victim of her own making. It feels like she wants to suffer. It feels like she's like luxuriating in how hard she thinks her life is. It feels intentional. It feels very LA. I'm not disliking the book because of that. That's just the type of character she is. And I'm fine with following a character like that. But it's just a little more insufferable of a character than I thought that it was going to be for this story. I'm finding it really interesting. I like the writing style of it. It's a little bit stuffy at times. The writing style is a little stuffy, but I feel like I'm gonna like this one. I like where it's going. I think I'm gonna try this one on audio. I haven't done any of these books on audiobook yet. I just keep reading all of them physically. Because this is a little stuffy to read physically, I'm wondering if I might enjoy it a little better on audio. So I think I'm gonna try that. First impression, it's good. I've made it to part 2 in the book, which is not quite midway, but getting kind of close, and it's part 2. So I thought this would be a good midway update point. I have been listening to the audiobook for this section of the book, and at first I was like, oh god, this is a horrible idea, because I was finding the main character insufferable, and then the narrator's voice really leans into that. It really leans into that, and it is just not a very enjoyable listen. Like, she just sounds, you know the Debbie Downer skit on SNL? Kind of like that. She just sounds like a Debbie Downer a bit. But now that I've been listening for a while, I've kind of gotten past it. I've gotten used to it. It's going fine. So audiobook is fine. Not my preferred method, but I want to get more of this read today and I've got some stuff to do. So audiobook is what's working for me. As I mentioned, there's a part 2, so I won't give away what happens, but the trajectory of the novel is moving at a faster pace than I thought it maybe would. I can't say I'm enjoying this very much. I'm not hating it. I'm not loving it. I would just say I'm liking it skeptically. It's kind of hovering around a 3-star, and depending on where the story goes, it could either work its way up or work its way down or just stay right in the middle. I'm just not aligning with this character and their choices. She's not making good decisions, and I don't need my characters to make good decisions. I like for my characters to make bad decisions. I like to indulge in bad decisions via my characters. That's a very common thing. But I don't know, I'm just not aligning with her and the path that she's taking. There is a remarkably memorable scene with a tampon, which I will never forget. So far in general, I don't know, this book's just not doing it for me. I'm not rooting for these characters or passionately rooting against them. I'm just kind of like along for the ride. I finished all 4s. I did not like it. I'm giving this one a 2. So far we've had 2 2s, 2 5s. The last book I read will be the tiebreaker for if this was a majority success or not, I guess. But yeah, this one, didn't like it. I was like in the story the whole time. You know, I wasn't suffering reading it, but upon finishing it, I just feel like it didn't have a lot to say. I felt that way. I didn't take away much from this. I like the concept of what it's trying to talk about motherhood and womanhood and like coming into yourself and sexuality and, you know, all these things, all these thoughts are great. There's a lot of great books that tackle these things in a lot of great ways. I think the biggest thing that made me feel so distanced from this was this main character, and she was just truly so insufferable and privileged, and the way she came across, I feel like would have been more successful if it was like satire, but it didn't feel like it was satire. It just felt like it was trying to be authentic. I don't know. I'm just like, I could not connect. And I don't always have to connect to my characters, but I guess because I couldn't connect, it felt like you were supposed to connect. I felt like this was supposed to be saying something, and I wasn't connecting, and it wasn't saying anything to me. There were some things that she would like say that I just didn't like. I don't know. There's like some weird statements about lesbianism in the book. Like at one point, the main character is like smiling at a flight attendant or something. She's like, I gave her my lesbian smile. And it's like, this is a woman who is married to a man, and she is in love with him. Like she loves him and is attracted to him, I think. She also has had relationships and sexual encounters with women, potentially also non-binary people. And so some of that phrasing just felt a little strange to me. Like specifically lesbian was used like multiple times, but in very strange ways. I'm like, it's okay to be bisexual. It's okay to be pansexual. It's okay to be a lesbian, but like, I don't know. Something about it just felt really strange to me. The whole thing felt very LA and not in a satirical way and just kind of an annoying way. The way it ended didn't really work for me. It didn't like, I don't know. I just didn't really like it. It just feels kind of like if I were out to dinner with this author, I would not have a good time. You know, like this just feels like someone I probably just can't connect with, which is fine. Is this one of the best books of 2024? I cannot imagine how it would be, but I don't know. I just don't get it. There's times that I don't like books, but I get it, right? Like I can see why it's popular, why it's acclaimed, why people think it has something to say to them. I just don't see it. I don't see the vision with this one. I didn't get it. It was not for me. Time to jump into the last book, and hopefully it's another success. Pages into You Dreamed of Empires, and this is a very short one. It's only 200 or so pages, so this might be my only update, and then I'll just finish the book and let you know my final thoughts. So far, this is quite a challenging read for me. This is based on some historical context of an event that happened in the 1500s, and I'm just not a big history person, and so I've had to do some Googling and read some Wikipedia pages to get up to date on exactly what this is about. And there are a lot of names I'm unfamiliar with and town pronunciations I'm unfamiliar with, so I've been listening to the audiobook, and that really brings the story to life because within a given sentence there may be 3 or 4 words that I'm just not familiar with because they are different types of names that I've never really heard before and I don't know how to pronounce. And so the audiobook is great to have as a tandem read with this. I especially like to be looking at it while I'm listening to it so that I can kind of learn as I go, but I'm not going to butcher all of that for you. I will just tell you this is set in this town that I still don't know how to pronounce. There's even a note in the beginning from the author that is a note to English readers about the pronunciation, and I read that and I tried and I I still am like, I'm not confident in it. I'm just not sure. But this is the city that ended up turning into Mexico City. And the history of this in the 1500s is that there was a Spanish conquistador named something with a C, Hernan Cortez, and he arrives at this town, which is the seat of the Aztec Empire, and the head person in charge is Moctezuma. He's the emperor, and the story takes place on, I think, just one day. It's broken up from before the nap, and then after the nap, which is really funny. And what happens in real life, like the historical context of this story, is that Cortez was going to try to take over, but then Moctezuma ended up laying a trap for him. But then he found out, and they got into a conflict, and Moctezuma ends up dying, and then they take over the city, and that's how it became Mexico City today, I suppose. I'm sure I've heard that somewhere in a classroom before, but that's just not like back of hand knowledge for me. So this is a reimagining of that story, and I think it's gonna maybe have a different ending. I'm not totally sure. There's some like funny elements to it because the Emperor Moctezuma is doing a lot of hallucinogens, and he's just kind of like an interesting dude saying interesting things, having interesting behavior. You get a lot of different zoom ins on different characters and their POVs and what they're thinking. There's two different translators who have to talk between them because they both speak two languages and they have one in common. So the one speaks to the translator who translates to the other translator who translates to them. And so then they're kind of like mixed messaging sometime and changing some things up, which is fun. So it's kind of like a political strategy type of story. I feel like I saw that there might be a fantasy element as well when I was looking at Goodreads. I'm not sure if that'll be the case, but it's been a challenging one. I'm interested in it. I'm just not fully like consumed by it because there's so many hurdles that I think I'm getting over, but I know what's going on now. I'm feeling more comfortable in the story 50 pages in, so we'll see how it goes. I don't have the highest hopes for this one being a hit for me because this is just like, I don't really do historical stuff that much, but we'll see. Maybe it'll surprise me. People seem to really love it and especially really love the ending. So I will continue. I'll probably just go ahead and finish the next 150 pages and then I'll let you know my final thoughts. I finished You Dreamed of Empires, and I know I said this was gonna be the tiebreaker because I had 2 stars and 2 5 stars, but this is going to be right in the middle because I'm giving it no stars. I'm not gonna rate it. I just feel like it would not make any sense for me to rate this book because I just don't even have a rating for it. It was just so not something I would usually read and just so not something I was following very well, to be honest with you. I did try with this book. I tried so hard and it was just above me. Sometimes books are just above me and this one was. I'm sure I could have like really slowed down and tried to follow it, but I was just having trouble following who characters were, these different names, what was going on. Generally, I got the gist of the story, but I didn't really sit with it like it's meant to be sat with. I just spent a lot of it pretty confused. And I found a good example of that to justify myself because I am a reader. Like I can read well-constructed things, right? But this is just confusing by nature. For one, there are not quotation marks when people are talking. Dialogue's not even broken up on different lines going back and forth between people. It's all just shoved into one paragraph. And so I'm gonna read you this excerpt of a paragraph to just show you how challenging this can be at times to keep up with what's going on. I'm also gonna do a terrible job saying these words. I'm trying, I promise. No one had seen him since the emperor sent him after the Castellecta, he replied. At the call-up, people were surprised he wasn't there and outraged that in his absence, the Tlatone let the Tlaxcalta make camp in Iztapalapa. So who issued the call to arms? Cuauhtémoc on the emperor's orders. It should have been Cuauhtémoc, insisted the Cuauhtémoc. So even just that alone, sometimes people have various names and titles, like who are all these people, what's happening? I don't know. It was stuffy. It was difficult for me to get through. So it doesn't really make sense for me to read. I tried it, I gave it a shot. I got through the whole thing. I read everything. I'm gonna have to like read some author interviews or reviews or something to really absorb it. But yeah, for now, leaving it just as no rating. So that puts a wrap on reading the 5 best fiction books of 2024. According to the New York Times. Some of them I loved, some of them I didn't, some of them I was unsure about. It was kind of a mix, but I would say this was pretty successful for me to have 2 5-star reads out of this batch of books. That was a pretty good way to kick off the year. Some of these feel like they make sense on the list to me, some of them don't. It's a pretty wide-ranging grouping of books. They're all very distinct and different from one another. And if you're looking at just all fiction books that were published last year, I'm sure it's incredibly difficult to narrow it down to just 5. So for the most part, I think they did a pretty good job. As a recap, Martyr was unfortunately a disappointment for me. This one ended up being a 2-star. I liked the concept, I liked the idea of it, just the execution, the way it drags on, the structure of it. While in concept sounds interesting, just didn't leave me satisfied with the full reading experience. Good material I have not been able to stop thinking about since I finished it. This was a 5-star and I just kind of want to read it again. I don't know why, I just really loved it. I think I'll read a different Dolly Alderton book before trying to read this again, but I just really liked being with these characters, being in this world. I really liked her writing style. This is definitely an author that's going to be at the top of my radar now. All 4s, bit of a strange one, gave it a 2-star. I will say I appreciate the experience with this book because I was engaged from beginning to end, wondering where it was going to go. And it has some interesting ideas, and just thinking about specific points of this book and things that the author did. There's an interesting story in here, sort of, but I just couldn't get past the disconnect from the characters with this one, and it just didn't feel like a story that was fully resonating with me. Clearly it's resonated with a lot of others, but just wasn't for me. James was really great. This was my other 5-star. For this to cover such serious topics, it really just has this feeling of adventure when I think back on this book. You know me, I love a story of survival, so I think I was kind of bound to enjoy this one. And then You Dreamed of Empires. I wish I could have loved it. I wish I could have followed it. This one just was not clicking with me. This was probably the farthest pushing out of my comfort zone since it was set in the 1500s and I just almost never go back that far in my reading. So I appreciate it for getting me to pick up something that was just totally outside of what I'd normally pick up. But it would be hard for me to recommend it because I just didn't really have that much of an opinion on it. So that is a wrap on all the books. Let me know down below if you've read these books and what you thought of them. Let me know if I convinced you to pick any of them up. And if you have any other ideas of just like fun challenges or TBR projects to complete like this, I'm just really in the mood of just continuing to work through a checklist. Anywhere from like 5 to 10 books is about what I'm looking for. Ideally 5 I think is a really good number, a good compact amount to put in a reading vlog. I don't necessarily want to go back and read any Goodreads Choice Awards categories at this point, but you know, if there's anything else you thought was an interesting list to look at that talks about the best books, either of the year, of the decade, anything, I'm open to it and you can let me know down below. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.